Beginning our Daf Mesech Kesuvos Daf Tezvav, we begin on the bottom of the Dalman days, 5 lines up at the bottom of the Amid, where the Gemara begins the discussion of the previous Mishnah regarding, which was continuing the theme when a woman has bia to someone, if we suspect or we assume that if he's kosher to kahuna or not, and our Mishnah had a specific case regarding a young girl, and she was violated, where we said if most of the people of the city are masin the kuna, okay, so you go after the Muslim majority and she get married to the kuna. That's our Gemara is going to discuss who's the time about Mishnah. Something we're going to discuss in today's daf are the famous Talmudic dictum of kol kavua. Whatever stationary, we give 50-50. So even if, let's say, you see all these stores, you go to corned beef row, and you have 9 out of 10 stores are kosher, and one store is not, and you're not sure which store you bought from, you wouldn't be able to assume that it's kosher, even though 9 out of 10 stores are kosher, because it's stationary. You went to that place, and it would be 50-50. You would have to treat it as possibly treif. In contrast, what's known as kol b'parish, whatever has separated meruba parish, has come from the majority. So therefore, if you find a stack of corned beef, and there's 9 out of 10 stores are kosher, you could assume actually that it's going to be kosher. Mailas b'yuchsin is a concept that we find many times in these dafim, that although halacha would not mandate so much, when it comes to yichus, when it comes to lineage, let's say marrying to kahuna, they made a requirement of a higher status. At the end of the daf we discuss regarding what's discussed in Bava Kama, Shartam, if an ox in the first 3 times gores is only Chatzin Nezek, Shermuid, then when it does it 3 times it has to pay Nezek Shalom. However, as we'll see, that when it comes to a non-Jew, the halacha is differently, because their laws, they don't require any payment for the ox. Therefore, when they gore, and when the Jew gores, Jew's ox gores a non-Jew, he doesn't have to pay anything. But when there's gore, the Jew, actually we require Nezek Shalom even by a tam as a penalty to make them be more careful with their oxen. So begin the current daf. We start in the bottom of the daf on base 5 ones up at the bottom of the Amid. As we mentioned, the story in the Mishnah of Rabbi Yesi. It says the story with a girl that went to draw water from the spring and she was violated. We said if most of the people of the city are masin the kahuna, they're kosher, they're not psulim like a mamzer, most of the people are kosher. So this woman could go ahead and marry the kahuna. We assume that whoever the rapist was, he was a kosher person, did not invalidate the woman with that bia. So now the Gemara asks, Amalei Rabba L'Rav Nachman says, the Amar that he says in the Mishnah that you need to have the most of the people that possibly were the perpetrator are kosher, and therefore the woman would presume her to still be kosher. Come on, who's he going like? It's not like any of the 2 Tanoim that we had in the previous daf. Who says that the woman is menace, that we believe, that we assume that the man who was with her was kosher. We said that he holds that even if most of the people are pasultar, we would still validate her because he holds hemari shal chaskasish as a chaskashish. Up until now, we knew she was okay for kuna. Now, out of doubt, we don't know who the violator was. Even if most are psulim, he would validate the woman, as we established on previous dafim. So why do you have to say you have kshem? And he could be sure if it's going like a bishua, it would have kshem nami pasul. How could he say that the woman's going to be kosher? He holds even if Reba Kasherim, we hold that she was Isra Lochaz Kasa, she lost the Chazak. We don't know who the man was, and therefore we would say she's apostle. So who is the Mishnah? Who's the Mishnah Benuri going like? They saying she is kosher only if it's Reba Kasherim, not like a Malil and not like a Yeshua. So Malay, so Reb Nachman responded to Rav and he says, Hachi Amar B'hin Marav. This is what Rabbi Marav says, that truthfully Rabbi Menui is like Rabbi Yeshua. And over here, it's because we have 2 majorities to say that she's kosher. That's why Rabbi Yeshua would agree that she would be kosher like Rabbi Yehuda. Which later on the Gemara is going to explain what's the difference between 2 ruby, what's called 2 rives, and mechad rubi from 1 rive. But that's what the Gemara is going to answer, that even Rabbi Yeshua would agree that although generally you don't go after the majority, like Reb Kshem would still say she's pasul, but here there's 2 majorities, which is, as Gemara continues to have that actually the Kroina shel Tzipori Hayamaisa. This story that we said in the Mishnah was on the wagons of Tzipori, meaning it was the market day. We have all these caravans and wagons that are coming from other places to Tzipori. Like Rabami. That now you have the majority of the travelers and you have the majority of the people of the city. Because the Amr Rabami says, this that all the caravans of these people were also ksher and iveris l'jam. Those were kosher people that were passing by. And so there's layers that we're explaining here to explain. First, we're saying it's talking about there was a market day. That's the first step. And then we're saying, like Rabbi Ami, that those people who came on market day, the majority of those were kosher people. And then the third layer is Rabbi Ami. The Rabbi Ami says that this story was Nev'elis B'Kroivis, which actually sounds like that this woman was violated when she was on one of the wagons. And therefore, Ksher L'Kuna. Therefore, she's kosher L'Kuna. Which the Gemara asked, what B'Kroivis L'Kataitach? You think the story had to take place where she was raped on one of the wagons? What shaykhs? No, it means Nef'elis B'Shas K'roivis. The bia was at the time when there were many caravans that came to the city, that all the wagons were there. Therefore, she's kosher L'Kuna. Because, like we explained, because since the people of the caravans were kosher that were passing by, who you could say was from them, so you have the majority of the people of the city were kosher. You have the majority of the people who were traveling, they were kosher. Therefore, that's today Ruby, then we're going to say that's going to be kosher. But if let's say, but in contrast, if let's say, one of the people of Tzipari, if let's say, we know for sure that it's one of the people from Tzipari came in and did bia. So it's one of the people of the city. So even though Tzipari is a city that the majority of people are masin l'kuna, that the women that they're married to can marry kuna, they're not psulim to invalidate it, still have vlad shtuki. The child's going to be what we call a silenced child that cannot marry into kuna, because that's going to be only one ruby. It's going to be only one right. We know from Tzipari, it's not from the caravans. And a right itself is not enough to validate. Like this that Rav Dimi taught when he came, he said the Omer Zeiri Omer B'Chanina. Some say it was Omer Zeiri Omer B'Chanina, which all it is just taking out Rav Dimi from here. It's not that Rav Dimi when he came he told us this. Rather Zeiri said in Rav B'Chanina that you need to have two majorities, as the Gemara is going to explain the reason. Holchin Acharay Ve'ir says you go after the majority of the people of the city to validate. Ve'in Holchin Acharay Tzia, and you don't go after the majority of the people that are traveling. For example, let's say a place that's far from the city, we know for sure it's from the people that were traveling, not from the people of the city. You're not going to validate the girl, even if the majority of those who are traveling are kosher. Which the Gemara is going to explain this. It's not as the simple understanding. The Gemara says, Kalapilai, which way are you going with this? What would be the understanding? Hani, when the majority of the people are traveling, they're 90, they're in motion, and they're actually to the contrary. There you should go after the majority. Whereas Bahani, the people of the city, are Kevi V'Kaimi, they're stationary. And as the Gemara is going to tell us shortly, Kol Kavu, whatever stationary is actually Kamech Salnestim, is like 50-50. And therefore, even if there's one puzzle in the city, you would invalidate. So how could you say it's almost the exact opposite of what logic would tell us? How could you tell me that if it was one of the people of the city, then you go up to the majority, but one of the people that are traveling, you wouldn't? If anything, it's the exact opposite. When they're traveling, you have Kol Deparish, because they're traveling, they're not in their stationary places. Then you say you go up to the road. In the city, to the contrary, they're stationary. And therefore you would say Kevat Samesadam, even in one going puzzle, you should have validated, because it's always 50-50. So how do you explain this? So the Gemara says, you're right. It's not the simple way you would read it. You read it as follows. When you go after the majority of the people of the city, only if you have, together with the majority of the city, you also have the majority of people who are traveling with that. What's called two rights. But no, you would not go after the majority of the city if you just had the city itself. And neither would you go after the just majority of those who are traveling. So the Rashi explains the way you have to read it is when we were saying that you don't go after the majority of the people who are traveling, it meant only, if you only have the people of the ones who are traveling, you're not going to go after, and for sure you're not going to go after the majority of the people of the city itself, because that's more stationary. When we said that you're going to go after the Reiv Be'ir, is if you have Reiv Siyah Ba'ada. And when we said you don't only go after the Reiv Siyah, is if you only have Reiv Siyah. Because, and for sure, Reiv Be'ir. So you need to have both to go ahead and validate this girl. Says my time. What's the reason that after the majority of the city, the travelers, you're not going to go after? Isn't that what's called Reiv? And we go after Reiv, especially since it's Parish. Says the Gemara, you're right. Really, when you have just, let's say, it was way out of town. So you know it's not for sure from the people, the members of town. It's the people who are traveling. And most of the people who are traveling were kosher people. So why are you going to invalidate the girl to marry the kahuna now after she was violated by this unknown man? It's a gezeir, it's a rabbinic decree. Of Rav Sia, if we let you by the majority of the people that were traveling, then up to Rav Ir. Then you might come to validate, even when it's in the majority of the people of the city, which that is problematic, because they're stationary. And stationary, you cannot go up to the majority, you have to go even if there's one puzzle, it's already going to be kamech samech tzedami. But then the Gemara says, what do you mean, Rav Ir Nami? What do you mean? But even when you have the majority of people in the city, let's say the story took place in town, if they go, if the bayil, if the rapist left his house, and he went legaba tahar, he's moving. And that we know, called the parish, whoever separates miruba parish, going to the majority. Why are you saying that town is problematic? Because it's called kavua. It's not necessarily kavua. If he came to her, he was parish. So he was from the majority. And then why is it going to be puzzle in town? Even town, you tell me the reason why Rav C is problematic because of Rav Ir. Rav Ir also shouldn't be problematic. Because it's also called the parish, miruba parish. That's how the laws of the majority go. Of achirab lahatas, go always after the majority. So the Gemara says, no, we needed the ka'az le'ihi legabayu. You're right. The whole concern was if she goes to him, which Taisa explains, it means going into his house. Because even in town, even if she goes to him, that's not considered that it's kavua, because that's going to be similar to when you find a piece of meat between the stores. That's not considered kavua. That's stationary. The meat's not moving either. Why is that different? Right? The piece of meat is stationary. You don't say that because it was removed from its original place. So it's not going to be helpful enough if the woman went to him in the marketplace. You would have to have that she goes to his house. If it was his place of origin, like we find by the case of the 10 stores with the meat. That's what Taisa explains. So that's the concern when she's going to go to his house. With then he's stationary. Oh, but Ramzeri says, Kol Kavua, whatever is stationary, then it's like 50-50. And therefore, even if most of the people in the town are kosher, which is either, whichever Rav it is, either most of the people in the town, which is, we're concerned that she might go to him, or even if most of the people in the caravan are kosher, that's a gzeira for Rav Ir, it's going to be possible, like Rabbi Shua. But when there's two majorities, we're going to validate her, because then there's nothing to be geyser about, because there's two majorities. When there's one of Rav Sia up to Rav Ir, and then Rav Ir, when she might go to him, and then it's kol kavu kameh samech tzedami. When there's two majorities, Rav Ir and Rav Sia, then the Gemara says there's nothing to be concerned for that case, and that is why in the halacha of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan validated this girl to be tinas lekahuna because, like we said, it was b'kreinish tzipari, that there wasn't only the majority of the town, which Rabbi Shua would say is not enough. It was also Rav Sia, and together with those two majorities, we're going to say, okay, we could definitely assume that the man that violated her was a kasha. But on that, as the Gemara, me being a true Rabbi, do we really need to have two majorities to require her to be kosher? But the time in the Brisa it says, there's 9 stores. All of them sell kosher meat. One of them sells non-kosher meat. And the guy didn't know. He's like, okay, we're in this town, where's the kosher stores? They send him down, this is the Jewish quarter. He goes and he buys meat from one of them in a stationary place. Now, he comes back and they say, oh, which store? So I thought they're all kosher. No, one of them is not kosher. He doesn't know which one he bought from. So says the Brisa, his doubt's going to be forbidden because this is what's called kol kavu, whatever is stationary, and you're going to the stationary item. It's like 50-50, and you might have bought from non-kosher, even though it's a ratio of 9-1, doesn't make a difference. Now, whereas but let's say you find the meat in the street and you don't know which store it came from, then you go after the majority. Why? Because since it came in front of us, it's not that you took it from its place of stationary, so it already was punished through some other form, because Rashi's Bavar in the question, every time you also take from Kotvo, you're also making it parish. No, it's where it came through some other means and it was parish, that's called the parish. Whatever separated, Meruba parish, or separated from the majority. And you see that you don't need to have 2 majorities, you see it's up with 1 majority, so that seems to contradict the halacha that we're saying that we're requiring for halacha of our Mishnah 2 majorities. Says the Gemara, okay, Maybe you're going to say, maybe that Bryce is talking about that the doors of that state were not locked. So what about that? Did you have another majority that comes from elsewhere? So Rashi says, for example, let's say if most of the traveling butchers are kosher Yisrael that come over here. So you have two majorities. You have the stores are majority. You just have majority of the traveling butchers are also. Or let's say, in general, most of the butchers of that whole country are Jews. So you have two rights. You have Rav of the ear, and you have the Medina that are traveling. So maybe that's why you'll say the Brisa holds the meat that you find is going to be kosher, because called the Parshminu, not just one Rav of the town, you just have two Ravs. You have the traveling butchers who are also Jewish. Says the Gemara, you can't say that. Because Amr Bzeri says, he says, even if the doors of that country are locked, no visas, no passport, no one's allowed to come in, still we're going to say that the meat that you find is kosher. So obviously you only have one Rav, you don't have two Ravs. We're back to the question, why in the halacha of our Mishnah we're requiring the girl who is Nivala, who had someone that was Ba'ala, who violated her, that you need to have two majorities, and here you only need to have one majority. Says the Gemara, you're right. Mala asu b'yuchasim. That although you're right, you don't need to have more than one majority to allow, let's say, kosher meat. But when it comes to marrying to the kahuna, the Yeshua, and so to explain your B'ich Benuri of our Mishnah, would hold that you need to have two majorities to validate for our kahuna, because they made an elevated status for kahuna and yichus. But you're right, in general, one majority would be enough. Which the Gemara opens up now the discussion about how do we know these halachas. Gufa, we learned Amr B'Zera, which we mentioned in passing. The Gemara is going to bring the source for this halacha. We know the halacha is kol kavua. Whoever is, whatever stationary, is like 50-50. Whether it's a leniency or whether it's a stringency. You're always going to say it's a 50-50 shot. You don't know which one you went to. What was stationary, it's not always coming from the majority. Statistically speaking, the one you went to could be any one. And any one will have that same 50-50 chance. That's what the Gemara says. It says about another Rabbi Zera, where does Rabbi Zera get this from? That this halacha of kol kavua is kemetza mechzik. If you think it's from the halacha that we just mentioned before, from the 9 stores, all of them sell kosher meat. One sells not kosher meat, and he bought from one of them. He doesn't know which one he bought from. So the halacha is, in the Brisa, we said, the doubt is going to be forbidden. When you find it, then you go after the majority. But what you see is, when you're going to it, it's kavu, it's stationary, it's going to be like mefzeh because you have a majority of 9-1. And still you're telling me that it's going to be aser. Obviously you see from that Brisa, kol kavu k'mefzeh. Says the Gemara, yes, but hasan l'chumah, that's only as a stringency. Who said that it also works as a leniency? The other Rabbi says the Gemara, let's bring a Rabbi from a Tesefta and Meseftas Taharos. Metishat Svardim. If you have 9 dead frogs in your pool, in Rishus HaYachid, in a private domain. Now, dead frogs are not metame, but there's Mesheretz Echad. In your pool, where you have all these dead frogs that were croaking away, you have this one toad, which looks very similar to a frog. That's Beinaim, that's between all these dead frogs. Now, that is a sheretz, that's metame. Menoga be'echad, now you're here, you're trying to get out all these dead frogs from your pool, and you touch one of them. Now, you don't know which one of them you touched. Now, that's kavua, that's stationary. So the halacha is that sveikai tami, that even though 9 of them are not problematic, and one of them is, we see that since it's a suffix in Rishus HaYachid, we're going to say that you're tummy. But one thing is, what do you mean suffix? What do you mean? There's a right. It's not suffix tummy. There's always a klal in suffix. There's always a klal of suffix tumma in Rishus HaYachid. It's tummy. In Rishus HaYachid, it's going to be tum. But it's not a suffix. Raiv is a vadai that for sure that I go after the majority. So I for sure touch the frog, not a toad. So why are you telling me that I'm going to be tummy? Obviously, because since it's stationary, we look at it as 50-50. It's like a regular equal doubt. So you see that you go after, when it's kavu, it's kemetza mefzedam, it's going to be like 50-50. Says no, but hasan nami, it's also going stringently. Then you're telling me that you're not going to go after the majority of the tahar, you're going to go after that one tummy one. But what does that prove regarding as a leniency? So Eloreva says the Gemara, which this is also over there in that Tosefta Meseftas Taharos, you have the same case flipped around. If let's say there's metisha shratzim, let's say there's 9 shratzim, there's 9 toads. But you have one frog amongst them. And you touch one of them. You don't know which one of these 10 creatures you touched. Was it the 9 shratzim, the 9 toads which are metame, or was it the one fradeh? So b'shus hayachid, like we mentioned before, okay, of course it's always going to be tame, because even if you had the other way around, 1 toad and 9 frogs, it would be tame. For sure, over here we have 9 toads and 1 frog, which is going to be tame. But the main point is for the next part. But let's say it was in the public domain, in the middle of the street. There was all these dead. They come public works, and he's working for public works, and it's in Rosh Hashanah. Sveikoi tar. The doubt is going to be tar because that's a klal in suffix tumah b'shus harabim. We learn that from Saita, where it has to be only secluded. Then you say the suffix is going to be asr. But when it's b'shus harabim, open in public area, then the suffix is going to be tar. But one thing is, obviously, that you're treating this majority of tumah. Most of them are toads. There's 1 frog, and you touch one of them. We see that you treat it kemech tzametz like 50-50, and then you're going to go lenient, because if you don't treat it like 50-50, there's no suffix tumah. There's definite tumah, because the raiv are shratzim. From the fact that you can tell me that the guy's going to be tar because of suffix tumah shazarabim, must mean it's a suffix. There's a doubt. Raiv you don't call a suffix. Raiv is kavada, and there's raiv are toads. Raiv would be metame. And the fact that you're telling me that he's going to be tar because suffix tumah shazarabim, obviously because kol kavua, whatever stationary is kemechza mechza, is not only a stringency, it's even going to be a leniency, as we find for the halacha of suffix tumah b'shasarabim.
When do I say butul b'rav? When do I say butul b'rav?
If it's batal, these are independent entities. Anytime you even have a pot of meat, if you have each meat is independently chashuv, then you won't say bittul. Here they're independent entities. The frogs and the toads, they're all independent entities. So it depends, I guess, for what you would say bittul, but here when they're independent, you wouldn't say they could have been scattered. But the point is that we're going to treat it as a suffix because it's kavur, because it's stationary, and in regards to the person himself, if it's parish, then we say meduba parish. But bittul is a different halacha than meduba parish. That's more statistics versus as a nullification. But if you have these frogs, there's no bittul, even a barrier, b'chlal, you don't say bittul on. Even if, let's say, there's one bug, if it's intact, you don't even say bittul on that. Now, so the Gemara says, okay, great, that's a good source from a Tanoic source. But in the Midiraisa, no, and where do you have a biblical source for this halacha of kol kavuk hemefza mefzadim? So says the Gemara, the halacha is from Amakra. The pasuk says in Devarim, it says if a person is going to be an enemy to his friend, v'oravloi, and he's going to ambush him, v'kamalo, and he's going to get onto him, and he's going to hit him till he dies, then he's going to run away to one of these cities, etc. It talks about the murderer. But the wording is v'oravloi. He's laying ambush to him. Says the Gemara, it means until he has the intent to kill him, which that's excluding if let's say he intends to kill one person and then he kills someone else. That's how Rabbi Shimon expounds in Masechta Sanhedrin. But the Gemara says over there, that's not the main point we want. The Gemara says over there that for Rabbanon, how do they expound this pasuk about Arv Levakamalav Amid Ber B'yanai? So they say in the Shiur Ber B'yanai, it's Prat Lazark Evan Legoy. It's excluding a case of let's say you have a group of people, Jews and non-Jews, and he throws a stone into a group of people, like these shooters. They just shoot into a group of people. Now, it's specifically if there's Jews and non-Jews, because if there are 2 Jews standing and he intends to kill one, and they warn him, and he accepts the warning, and then the other one gets shot, he would be chai. And why are we saying over here? Rashi explains why we're saying v'rabanan. It's only because in Sanhedrin that's how the discussion is. Really just come to explain to us the Be'er B'yanai, but the Be'er B'yanai says that if some guy throws a stone into a group of people, then he's going to be he's not going to be chayiv. Says the Gemara, what's the case talking about? If there's 9 Canaanim and 1 Jew amongst them, or maybe typically, of course you're not going to execute the Jew because the Jew be Canaanim. Most of them were Canaanim. So why do you need a pasuk? Because if the majority are not Jewish, so of course you're not going to kill him. He doesn't get executed for killing a non-Jew. And inami pag, even if you can say it's 50-50, you still don't need a pasuk, because why would you think to kill him? Safek nefesh lahakol. But this is a doubt regarding capital punishment, which would go leniently in general. So when you have a safek, the pasuk says "Mamin lamahei b'tzilo edu," that the people have to save him. So therefore, why would you think even that you're gonna kill him if it's 50-50? So the Gemara says no. Obviously, the case must be talking about that he's going to be potter when he throws a stone into a group of people. There's a Ketisha Yisrael. There was 9 Jews, the Kanani Echad B'nei. There was one Kanani amongst them. The Avalei Kanani Kapua. So that non-Jew was a stationary amongst them. And the pasuk is coming to tell us this halacha: the b'chal kavua, whatever stationary, is kemetzametzadam. So you tell me that he's going to be potter from galus in that situation when there was one Kanani amongst 9 Yisrael. Because we said if it was most Kananim, of course we're not going to kill him because we go after the majority. If you go 50-50, even we have a pasuk of Tzilu Eidim, whenever there's a suffix by nefashos, we go lahakol. So why would I need a pasuk to exclude and to tell you ba'arav le'v'kamalav? It's only when he's intending, when they didn't explicitly go for the Jew, that then he's going to be potter. That is when you throw a stone into a group of people. It must be a case that I wouldn't have known otherwise, which must be telling me even 9 Yisraelim are one Kanani. But then the question is, so what's the halacha teaching us? It must be teaching us because since that Kanani is kavu, is stationary in that group, it's kamechza mechza. It's like 50-50, and therefore that's what we're going to be potter. If it was literally 50-50, we would have known that. The pasuk comes to teach us that even if it's not 50-50, even though it's 9-1, whatever the ratio is, still we're going to exempt him because of the fact that we're going to treat it like 50-50, and then it's going to be back to the tzilo eda, that we don't execute someone if it's not, if it's a suffix, we're going to go to nefashos lahakol. And that's the source, the biblical source for kol kavu kametza metzadam. Now relating to the halacha of Mishnah Itmar, we learned, it says the name of Rab, halacha Rabbi Yesi. The halacha is like Rabbi Yesi of our Mishnah, that he said that this woman who was going to fill up water from the spring, and she was raped, that she's kosher to marry to kahuna, because most of the people of the city were kosher. That was the halacha of the Mishnah. That's Rabbi Yesi. That's Rab saying halacha like Rabbi Yesi. Now, Rav Chan bar Rava Amarav, he says in the name of Rab that this halacha of Rabbi Menuri of our Mishnah, Haydosh Shahesa, was a temporary ruling, or they saw some other reasonings that were recognizable to be permitted. But in general, for all future generations, when such a story would come up, it wouldn't be enough that most of the people of the city were Masin Lakuna. We would have to have 2 majorities. That's how Rav Chan bar Rava Amarav says. On that Matzah, Rabbi Meir asks on this teaching of Rav Chan bar Rava, on Rav Chia bar Ashi, that the assumption of the Gemara right now is that when the first teaching, where Rav Chia bar Ashi said the name of Rav, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yisi by Mishnah, we're assuming that only because there was the majority of people in the city, that's why they validated the woman, and that's what Rav is saying, halacha is like Rabbi Yisi, even though there's only one majority of the people of the city, not like everything we explained up until this point. So therefore, Rabbi Yirmiyah is asking Rav Chia bar Ashi that what he said in the name of Rav, the halacha is like Rabbi Yisi of our Mishnah, what, liyuchzin lebin tregubi? You think for yichus to marry kahuna, you don't need to have 2 majorities? Really, halacha like Rabbi Yisi in that Mishnah, it's enough if most of the people in the city have Masin Lakuna? But what's not in the Mishnah Mesech shiur, and as we can come in days, it says that if there's a city that there's Jews and non-Jews live in that city, and what's about tinnik mushloch? You find a child just laying there, a baby's laying there, an infant was left there on the street somewhere. So if most of the people of the city are not Jewish, we treat the child as a non-Jew. If most of the people of that town are Jewish, Yisrael, you treat the child as a Jew. Naftzah, 50-50. Yisrael, we're going to treat the child as a Jew, which later on the Gemara is going to explain. So then what's the difference if most of the people are Jewish or it's 50-50, that you're making them into 2 different cases? Why don't you just say 50-50, you as a Jew, of course if it's a majority, you're going to treat as a Jew. But, the Gemara continues, the same Rav who we're discussing his opinion, he said, we didn't learn that if most of the people are Jewish, then we're going to treat the child as Jewish. Meaning, that's only to keep the baby alive. Because the courts are obligated to support a Jew. Because it says in the pasuk, You have to support a Jew. And for that, we're going to treat this baby as Jewish if Roiva Yisrael. But we're going to Yichus? Loi. If, let's say, this baby that was found is a girl, she's going to be forbidden to a Kohen. And even though you're not going to be concerned, says Rashi, for Anasufi, which those who mention Kedushin of Ayim of the Beis, which if they're left in such a way that you assume that, let's say, that this child is definitely from a psul, because why would they have just abandoned that baby? But even if it's not in that type of situation, we're still concerned maybe it's a daughter of a non-Jewish woman, and some take out the gears so that, according to those who hold gears with possible kuna, even this girl would be forbidden to kuna. But one thing is that Rav is saying, for Yichus, we're not going to treat this baby as, maybe it's from the non-Jews. Even though the majority are Jewish, that's for at least to keep the baby alive. Because you have an obligation to keep a Jewish child alive. But for regarding Yichus, we're not going to consider this baby as Jewish. Ushmol Amar, we'll get back to this. He says, this that we treat the baby as Jewish is that we even, if let's say a building collapses as a pile of rubble, on Shabbos we're going to clear the rubble to get that baby out because we consider that baby as a Jew. So, but one thing is, what the Gemara is asking is, we see that according to Rav, that you need two majorities for Yuchas, and why? Because what did Rav say? Rav said most of the people in town are Jewish, a minority are not Jewish. So, although we're going to treat the baby as Jewish, for what? L'hachayosi, to keep him alive, but for Yichus, to marry Kuna, no. The one majority is not going to be effective. What do you see? That Rav holds you need two majorities. Well, that contradicts Rav Ashi's interpretation that Rav Paskins halach like a basic Rav Mishnah, which has enough just that the members of the city are kosher to marry to Kahuna, and this girl got raped by some man. You're going to tell me that she's kosher to Kahuna? How could Rav say that? Rav requires two majorities, not one majority. So it says the Gemara, what do you mean? Ishtamitze, Rabbi Yirmiyah, who asked this question, he didn't realize Hadam Rabbi Yehuda Merav. There's another teaching that we start off our daf with from Yehuda Merav. That actually halacha of our Mishnah, that's like Rabbi Yisi, also has two majorities. Because in B'krei Nishal Tzipari, the Abamais, story was when all the caravans were coming to Tzipari. So this perpetrator, we have two majorities telling us that he's a Ish Kasher. That's why Rav says halacha like Rabbi Yisi of our Mishnah. Which is just like Rav's other teaching that we just quoted here a few lines ago, that for Yichud it's not enough, we're one majority, you have two majorities. But then the Gemara says, wait a second, if that's the case, then the other interpretation we just said on the bottom of Aman Aleph, we have Chan about Rav Adama that he says in the name of Rav. He says, no, look, it's not like our Mishnah. That was only a temporary ruling. So now, based on what you're telling me, that the Mishnah's ruling was two majorities, comes out, if you're saying there was a Rosh Hashanah, that means to say the inverse. That means to say L'dairis, that you don't need two majorities. You don't need one. Well then, Kashaha. Then you have the difficulty of this teaching Rav that we just quoted now, that says that for Yichus, no, it's not enough with one majority. You need two majorities. So obviously you need two. So how can you say it's enough with one? So that's the Gemara. No. The one who says, the teaching of Yehuda Merav, that the story of the Mishnah was B'krei Nishal Tzipari, that there's two majorities, would say, that he doesn't hold to that teaching. He would say that there was only one majority. And that's why it's a Rosh Hashanah. Because you usually need two majorities. So the one who says that teaching doesn't say that teaching. The one who says that it was a Rosh Hashanah, and that usually it's not like the way it was in the Mishnah, holds that the Mishnah was not B'krei Nishal Tzipari. It was only one majority, not two majorities. So everyone, ultimately, the way Rashi explains at least, Tais disagree, that everyone holds that you need to have two majorities. The question is, how do you learn the case of the Mishnah? Was the Mishnah two rights, and then you wouldn't say it was a Rosh Hashanah? Or would you say there was only one right, and then that was a Rosh Hashanah? But in general, you need to have two majorities. Now, the Gemara goes back to explain this teaching that we quoted. Masabad Tinik Mushlach. Let's say you find an infant that was just thrown in the street, and you find this baby. So, if most of the people are not Jewish, you can treat this baby as not Jewish. If most of the inhabitants are Jewish, you're still going to treat the baby as Jewish. Now, if Tzamach said 50-50, then you're still going to treat the baby as Jewish. And we quoted this before, Amar Rav. He qualified that we didn't learn that the majority of Jewish that you can treat the baby as Jewish. It's just that you have an obligation to support this baby, and the Jewish Federation is going to have to find some way to put this baby in foster care to keep him alive. But to say he's Jewish, that the baby, that she's a girl, she can marry a Kohen? Well, I know, when it comes to Shidduchim time, they're going to have to say, look, she can't marry a Kohen because we don't know her paternity. We don't know who her parents are. Shmuel Ami says this, that we consider this baby as Jewish if Rav are Yisrael is to clear the rubble. If, let's say, there's a collapsed building and there's this baby inside, and they say, oh, there's still one more baby inside. Which baby? Oh, that was the baby that they found. Yeah, you have to clear the rubble, even though you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos. But to save a life, you're allowed to. And even though we don't know if it's for sure Jewish, but since the majority are Jewish, we're going to treat the baby as Jewish. Now the Gemara asks, in Biyom Shmuel Hachid, does Shmuel really say that regarding pekuach nefashis, saving a life, you need to have the laws of majority to say that it's Jewish? That's what he's saying. He's saying, to clear the rubble, you need to know that a majority that this child is Jewish. But another teaching that says, when it comes to saving a life, we don't go after the law of the majority. Even if you have a doubt if this person that's in the accident is Jewish or not Jewish, even if most of the people are not Jewish, even if a building collapses with 100 stories and there was one Jew that was in that apartment complex, you're gonna clear the whole rubble to try to see if you can get to the Jew. So why are you telling me that you need to have Rav Yisrael to save this baby from the collapsed building? What do you mean? Shmuel does not hold you need Rav, even if it was a minority. Seller rather says, no, you're right. Kitman de Shmuel, when did we say Shmuel's teaching is actually a reshit? It was actually said on the first part of the Mishnah. We said that if most of the people are not Jewish, you treat the child as not Jewish, and that is what I'm a Shmuel, that to clear the rubble, meaning regarding Pekuach Nefashis, it's not that case. That even if most are not Jewish, you're still going to clear the rubble because you don't go after saving life based on laws of the majority. So then says the Gemara, if that's the case, so then when you are saying this halacha, that most of them are not Jewish, you're going to treat the baby as not Jewish, so then for what halacha relevancy does it have? Because since Shmuel is saying that you clear the rubble, so like Rashi says, obviously you're not treating the baby as a full-fledged non-Jew for everything. Because you seek to save a life, you consider him as Jewish. So for what halacha are you considering the baby as not Jewish? So my Papa says, Lachila Nevelis. It's that you could actively feed that baby non-kosher. And for sure, as we're going to explain, you don't return his lost objects, you don't compensate him for damages, but it's regarding only saving his life, we'll treat him as Jewish, because by Bekuach and Nefashis, we don't go after the right. But regarding, let's say, feeding him not kosher, yeah, you could treat him as a not Jew, and you can feed him even Nevelis. Then the Gemara says, okay, the next halacha, Rav Yisrael, what halacha is when you say the most are Jewish, then you treat the baby as Jewish. So my Papa, it's lahavzaloi aveda. It's to return this lost object, which that's a chiddush, which you take away from the Jew who found this and you give it to this child. Moreover, the Rabbanan in Sanhedrin B'Vayimvam B'Bei say that if someone returns a lost object to a Kanani, the pasuk says L'man tzvei sadav es tzmeya, which he's considering equal the Egyptians to the significance of the Jews, which returning an Aved is only for the Jews, and says, Lo Yev Hashem Sleicha, Hashem's not going to want to forgive him. So it's actually an Isser to return the Aveda, unless there's other reasons to allow that, but it's actually an Isser to return it to the Kanani. So that's the Chiddush that we're saying. Even so, since Rav Yisrael, we're going to treat this baby as Yisrael, and we're going to turn, when he becomes an adult, when he's even 50, he still has the same suffix, then you're going to turn his lost objects. That's the Chiddush when we're saying Rav Yisrael. Says the Gemara, now Mechza, you told me that it's 50-50, also Yisrael, you're going to treat the baby as Yisrael. So says the Gemara, how halacha is that for? Because you can't say it's to return his lost object, because if that would be the case, then why would you separate the two cases of Rav and Mechza? Either way, it's the same halacha of treating like Yisrael. So there must be some differentiation. So obviously when it's 50-50, you're not returning his lost object. So what halacha then are you treating him as 50-50 like Yisrael? She says it's l'nizak. It's for the laws of damages, which we learned in the Mishnah Baba Kaman of Alam Zayin and Beis, that when the shiur of a Yisrael, a Jew's ox, gores the shiur of a Kanani, the Jew is actually exempt. And the other way around, if the ox of a Kanani gores the ox of a Yisrael, whether it's tam or mu'id, he pays nezik shalom, the full amount of damages. In contrast, when Yisrael gores, when the Yisrael's ox gores another Jew's ox, a tam, which is first few times we pay only half damages, mu'id, when it's the third time we pay nezik shalom. So we're saying when we're treating this suffix, when the town is 50-50 Jews, 50 non-Jews, we're treating the child as a Jew, is for the laws of damages. So it says, what's the case talking about? If you say that our ox is goring his ox, and you're saying that we judge him like Yisrael, and we obligate the regular Jew to pay to that suffix half the damages, says why would you say that? Let the regular full-fledged Jew tell this suffix, I see right Yisrael. You bring a proof that you're a Jew, go and then take. Because it's mechsa, it's a suffix. So how can you, you have to bring a proof that you're Jewish and then I'll pay you. Says no, it's necessary in the case of the other way around. His ox, this suffix ox, when he becomes older, this baby that was found in the street, his ox gores our ox. And now the Jew is claiming from him, even though it was a Tom, to pay Nezik Shalom, because you're a Kanani. At least maybe. And the Tom's coming to tell us that no, we treat him like a Jew. That only Pagam Shalom is only going to pay Chatzi Nezik, but the Idach Pagam a little bit. The other half is going to tell him, I say right, the Lavi Shalom, bring proof that I'm not a Jew, and then I'll give to you. And that's what the Mishnah is saying, that the Bryce is saying that he could tell him that, prove that I'm not a Jew. If I'm not Jewish, I have to pay Nezik Shalom. But prove it, that's the same when it's mechta, he's saying that we treat him like Yisrael is regards to this halacha of nizakin regarding damages, that he wouldn't have to pay more than chatzi nezik, he wouldn't have to pay nezik shalom. This is return to the first parak in the Mesechta Kesuvos Daf, this is which spoke about primarily this halacha of marrying a besula, and you find that she doesn't have it. How do we treat her regarding Isser, or Shemazana, or regarding the Ksuba, and also regarding in general, if a woman has not Suleiman, and how does that apply to who she had to be with, regarding if she's puzzle for the kuna also, regarding was a nivel of the puzzle. Let's start the next Mishnah. Just take us starting off this next parak, the Isha Shenas Amala, which continues on the same theme of the Ksuba, which is really the topic of this Mesechta, the Ksubas, regarding the dowry. So the Mishnah says, the Isha Shenas Amala Shenas Garsha. You have a woman that was widowed or divorced, and she's claiming her Kesuba. Now, as Taisa points out, obviously there's no Kesuba over here, because if the Kesuba was here, we would see if she was a Besula Almana when they got married. But there's no Kesuba. And here, she's saying, Besula no Sasana. When we got married, I was a Besula. And if I get 200. Boyman, he says, which that's going in the case of when she was divorced, but if she was widowed and married, it would be the inheritance, it would be saying, Loi, ki, no, it's not true. Actually, I married you when you were a widow. Then we only get 100. And as Rashi also explains, the document of Ksuba was lost. So how are we going to verify how much she gets? 200 or 100. So in Yesh Aiden, if there's witnesses that were there by the chasna, Sheyatz is that she had left from her father's household, going out to her husband's household, Bihinuma, which you must explain exactly what Hinuma is, but that's something that they do by the wedding of a Basula. And Marisha Perua, her head was uncovered, meaning her hairs were on her shoulder. That was the custom when they would take her to Basula. They would take her out, what we call the Badekin. They go out from her father's household to the place of the Chasna. So it's a Masai. The next one is going to be 200, because obviously we remember the Chasna, and they did like they do by the Chasna of the Basula. He says actually, even giving out roasted grains, which when the grains are moist, they dry them in the oven, and that's kloyes, which they always stay sweet. So it's like also like a message. It's a alamul blabin sweet, it's a basula, it's nice and young and moist. If you dry them up right away, you stay sweet forever. That's also a raya. That's also a proof, because they used to give out these roasted grains for the children when the basulas would get married. The Mishnah ends off, seemingly unrelated. Rabbi Yeshua. She must explain what's going on. What is Yeshua agreeing to? But Yeshua, who, as we said in the previous Mishnahs, in the previous parak, although generally he does not believe that proponent, he always said Ein in the man, they should not believe, he agrees. Someone says to his friend, Sadazu, you know this field? That's my field? It's actually Shalavicha, he says, it's actually your father's. But I bought it from him. Oh, Shuneman, that person's believed. As a Getin Tab of Tazayin Minal. You know what? Kasha Pesha Asar, this is the famous, which Ksubis is famous for these types of discussions, of the mouth that's making it forbidden. Meaning this guy didn't know that it was his father's. It was only based on the testimony of this guy. So this that he's making it forbidden because saying it's not really mine, it's really your father's. Who ha pesha hitter? He's the same mouth that's permitting it, saying it was your father's. I'm not making it problematic for myself now saying that it's yours, but I also say that I bought it from him. So the same mouth that's forbidding it is permitting it. And therefore Rabbi Shua would agree that, that person would be believed. But let's say that guy has witnesses as his father's. So he doesn't need, it's not pesha aser, because I don't need your mouth to say it's my father's. I have witnesses my father's. But the one and he says, yeah, but I bought it from him, and he wouldn't be believed because there's no pesha aser with him. It's not a migo that, I was the one that said it's probably I could say it's permitted, because you're not the one saying it's permitted. We have witnesses saying it's my father's. And then he wouldn't be believed just to say that I bought it from him. Make it to any time for hosting.